You're listening to Streetside, the Street Medicine Institute Student Coalition podcast.
Hello and welcome to Streetside. This is the official podcast of the Street Medicine Institute Student Coalition. I'm your host today, Michael Brennan, and it brings me great pleasure to introduce to you Vikki Reynolds. Vikki is a psychologist, author, and activist from Vancouver, British Columbia. Vikki, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me. Glad to be here.
Would you take a minute and expand on that introduction? Tell us a bit more about yourself.
Sure. I'm Vikki Reynolds. I have a PhD, and I think people think of me as a trauma professor. But mostly I think about myself as a community organizer and a social justice activist. So my work has been to try to shoulder up workers doing the kind of work that you're doing, Michael, and all your good folks. Just those of us who are working in these contexts of oppression and suffering. And my job is to try to bring everything we know from social justice movements to stay sustainable and alive in this work. So that's kind of what I do. And I would just say I'm on the territory of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. I'm a white settler here. And everything that I bring doesn't come from academia. Most of what I know comes from community organizing over decades and decades of fellowship. So I just want to acknowledge that.
Fantastic. Vikki, I was looking at your website prior to doing this interview, and you have an upcoming workshop, and the title of it just grabbed me. I thought, this is what I want to talk to you about. So I'm going to read the title of your upcoming workshop. It's The Zone of Fabulousness, Resisting Vicarious Trauma and Burnout with Collective Care, Solidarity, and Justice Doing. Awesome title. Unpack that for us.
Like I said, I've worked in like all these contexts of overdose prevention sites, survivor torture centers, rape crisis centers, and workers are continually getting information from the psychology realm that what the kind of injuries or harms they get at work are mental illness diagnosis, like they have vicarious trauma, or they have burnout, or they have compassion fatigue. And if you look at those diagnoses, that they're basically based on ideas that these people we work with burn us out. And I don't believe any of that. I've been supervising folks doing this kind of work for over 3 decades. No one ever tells me it's the clients. And I actually believe what's happening to us when we get harmed in this work is not burnout or vicarious trauma or any mental illness. I think it's a spiritual pain or an ethical pain that happens because we're drawn to this work, Michael, for a certain set of commitments and values and ethics. And then when we have to transgress that, or we can't serve people, we can't help people, because of all these contexts that are so political and mean-spirited, then that's when we get into trouble. And I think that what happens to us is better understood as like spiritual pain or an ethical pain. So when I talk about the zone of fabulousness, this is just my, I used language that I made up from, how informed I've been by the queer community. I'm straight and cisgendered, but I just wanted language that was fluid and fun and possible and hopeful and, not psychological. So when I talk about the zone of fabulousness, I'm talking about times from a client-centered perspective, from if we really center the people you're trying to serve, how are we treating them? Not how am I doing mentally, but how are we treating people? And the zone of fabulousness talks about, when we're in that zone of fabulousness, that's when we're doing ethics and solidarity with other workers and the client's really at the center, and we're resisting enmeshment or disconnection. I think those are the ways we kind of get caught up in the work. And I really believe that the way to have sustainability in this work is to do it as collective care, not necessarily self-care. I'm really concerned about the trauma industry and the self-care industry telling everybody you have to use a bunch of time and money you don't have to go visit a spa lifestyle, and somehow that's going to make you more available to a suffering person the next day. And the weaponization of self-care, like if you're having problems in the work, this is because you haven't taken care of yourself enough. Have a bubble bath. So I think if our participants are being harmed and oppressed, I think if a bubble bath makes you okay with that, you might be in the wrong work. So for me, I think the answer is solidarity and collective care, and actually moving towards try to change some of the social structures that cause problems for people, but being in solidarity with other workers and keeping each other ethical. That's kind of it.
Vikki, that's brilliant, and I'm going to dig deeper on this. You've reconfigured it as spiritual wounding or spiritual distress that we experience when we're empathetic, compassionate people on the streets caring for the unhoused who may have mental.
Michael, the language I'm using is spiritual pain or ethical pain. Yeah.
Spiritual pain. Okay, great. Let's let's take that spiritual pain and tell me the antidote for that. I experience that spiritual pain every day that I'm out on the streets. What is the antidote? Unpack that a little bit further.
Yeah, well, I think just seeing the harms that we're experiencing, not as mental illness and stuff, like understanding this is about us being unable to walk our talk and be as ethical as we want to be with people. And I think the resistance to that spiritual pain is to try to stay ethical, to create solidarity with other workers and other good people, to have people give you a critique when what you're doing isn't ethical, to work for social change. But I also feel part of collective care. So I've always been about collective care, not self-care. The other stuff about collective care, which is a resistance to that spiritual pain, is being witnessed by other people, like seen by people who get you, you know? And so I think about things like mutual aid. That's what collective care is. Communities of struggle have always circled around and tried to shoulder each other up and care it for each other. So I think about, coming up with ways to strategies that we can resist the individualism of self-care and burnout and just go to the gym more and stuff, like trying things that are actually more spirited, relational. So I think there's ways to look at self-care. I think self-care, there are practices that are really important. I don't mean to diss self-care entirely, but it doesn't do the things we're being told it would do. I think self-care is really important, but it doesn't do anything to change the social determinants of health for people. So I feel like we have to do some self-care, and we can talk a bit about what I mean by that, how I discern that from the self-care of capitalism, I guess. But what we're looking for is collective care and solidarity and mutual aid and ways to be with each other in ways that out our rage and I think resist the gaslighting we're all getting that this is normal and this is fine. There's sanity making, I think, in us being in solidarity with each other.
I love that. Sanity making. That's a beautiful, beautiful phrase. You talk about shouldering each other up in the work, and you're making allusions to that. Tell me what that looks like in your work, in your frontline work. How do you shoulder each other up?
Well, I have about 10 years ago, at the beginning of the opiate catastrophe here in Vancouver, we've lost 50,000 people in Canada. We're just the size of California. Like we're not, we've lost 50,000 people over the last decade to these drug poisoning deaths, which is a direct impact of the war on drugs from the United States. It just came right across the border. So all the money goes to policing and everything that you've got. And so there was a time at the beginning of this catastrophe where people started to die in fast numbers. I've always worked with overdose and I've always worked with death. But all of a sudden, I was having a conversation with somebody who's on my solidarity team, somebody who shoulders me up, Tara Danger Taylor. And we were talking about, we have to have a memorial for this person on Thursday because they died. And I said, we can't because somebody else died. And it was the first time, Michael, I couldn't remember everybody I knew who died. And I couldn't remember everybody's name. And it became obvious the way we've had memorials for people in the past isn't going to work because we're having 5 people a day die in this province. And it was 7 before that, right? So, but I experienced myself as something psychologists would say is mental illness. I had an experience of being entirely outside of my body and disconnected. So I think trauma, if we think about trauma as oppression and overwhelm, that's what happened to me. And trauma disconnects you from your intellect, your spirituality, your physical body, your relationship with other people, and your relationship to Mother Earth. So I was totally disconnected. And I'm on the phone with Tara, and she's like, what's going on? I'm like, I'm just not right. I don't know what language I used. And Tara said, coming over right now, and just dropped the phone, came over here. We went into my backyard. We started a fire. We howled at the moon. I think we actually passed a bottle of spirits that were under my kitchen sink. And Tara stayed and we howled at the moon is what I called it. We outed our rage. We witnessed each other's struggle. We also talked about the people who had died as humans, as who they were as people, not how they were another statistic. And so Tara stayed with me until I was reconnected with myself intellectually, spiritually, my physical body, my relationship with others, my relationship with Mother Earth. So trauma disconnects, solidarity and revolutionary love reconnect.
Vikki, I want to ask a follow-up question on that. Those of us who are frontline workers are often accused of having poor boundaries. We tend to be empathetic, compassionate, kind, loving humans, and we put our hearts out there, and we are accused of having poor boundaries. Could you say a word about boundaries? Your perspective
Yeah.
on that?
Yeah, I think that's one of the reasons I came up with this zone of fabulousness. It's a very fluid space. So when you're in the zone of fabulousness, the client is at the center, and you're in solidarity and you're doing ethical work and you're getting critique from other workers. But it's fluid, meaning there are times you have to move right close to people. I have held people as they cried. But I don't think about that as enmeshment because it was for the client. It wasn't for me. There were other people aware of it. It wasn't intrusive, right? There's other times I've had to move farther away from clients. They call you the C word, they throw yogurt at your head, and you're backing off a bit, but you don't get with disconnection. You're just moving further away so that the person can take responsibility to repair the relationship. But there's times where we transgress, and that's when we get with enmeshment where I'm getting a hug from a client because I need a hug. And so I don't think about it as boundaries in terms of capital P professionalism. I'm like, is this in the service of the person? If it's in the service of the person and it's not private or secret, you have to make stuff public. As soon as you're doing something secret, I'm like, God, I hope Michael didn't hear me say that, or I hope he didn't see me do that. You should go tell Michael what you did. Be open. As soon as you have any thoughts like I need to hide what I'm doing, you're probably not fabulous. You might be transgressing against people either by being disconnected or enmeshed with them. So it's a fluid thing. So I don't think about boundaries, capital B boundaries, as fences and walls. I think of them as fluid spaces where we're responding in solidarity. And sometimes we have to get quite close to people. And sometimes we have to move a little bit further away, right? Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I want to bring up something that I experience in my day-to-day work, in that something that I realize sustains me is and I think as it should, but I'd like your guidance on this, that the relationship with my clients, with my patients, that the relationship there is nurturing to my spirit. That we have a level of, in Spanish, there's a great word, confianza, which is kind of like trust and mutuality in the relationship. And so that confianza that I feel with my patients keeps me coming back. It makes me want to continue to engage, and to be in relationship. And I just would ask your comments on that.
Yeah, well, look, I think the reality is that capital P professionalism is the problem with this idea, quote, boundaries. And so many of the ways boundaries are policed with professionals is to guard privilege and to guard professionals from feeling uncomfortable or having their privileges unmasked to them, right? So when I say build a solidarity team, Tara Danger is really clear. Her clients are on her solidarity team. There's some of the people who help her stay alive in the work. And we're not saying that when Tara was running a great big building, a housing building, that she goes to work and says, oh, look, someone committed suicide. Can you give me a hug? And do you want to talk about my inner child and help me find my happy place? I mean, she's not talking about that. She's saying, and if you watch, there's a video of mine on my website called Solidarity Teams. If you watch that, there's some folks responding to the opiate catastrophe, talking about how they use solidarity teams to do this. But Tara's really out about the fact that our clients, our participants are part of her solidarity team and sustainability. So she was saying, like, sometimes she would go to the building, even though she's so busy as the manager, she'd carve out space to do the public kitchen, to go cut up onions and stand next to a person who lives in the building who's cutting up the tomatoes and shoot the breeze. And that sustains her, reminds her, wishes it's nourishing, it's reciprocal, it's all those things you just mentioned, right? So I feel like when we talk about these capital P professional boundaries, I'm really concerned that what it's doing is breaking our relationships with people. And Michael, it's based on ideas that we're the well and the good and we're working with the broken. And it's a charity model. And we want a justice model. If you have a justice model, then you don't believe we're the well and the good. We are also not perfect humans. And in this struggle, I can help you, but another time you might help me. I want to give you a real example of that. I work in the downtown east side. It's the poorest part of Canada that's not on First Nations reserve. So I'll go down and do supervision, or I'm doing a debrief about a death by violence, just some really heavy lifting. I'm doing some really heavy lifting with workers to try to keep us alive and well in the work, okay? That's all good. That's great. That's me giving. I get that. I get paid for that most of the time. But then it's later in the evening and I'm waiting for the bus down there. That could be a precarious neighborhood, as any bus stop can be. I am a woman who's experienced violence from men. And so, you know what? A couple of guys who are drug users who know who I am will often just come up. If I'm waiting for the bus, they'll come up and talk to me. And there's just two men standing with me, talking with me till the bus comes. They're guarding my safety. They're keeping other people from approaching me at times. Do you know what I mean? They're
Oh, yeah,
waiting
I
for the
do.
bus, and they don't get on the
I do.
bus. They're just,
Right, right.
That's what I mean by reciprocal. This is not charity. They show up as men. That's the culture of accountable masculinity. They show up as men in solidarity with me. I've shown up as a worker trying to keep workers that are trying to keep them alive in the work. So these are, if we see these as relationships that we're in that are reciprocal, and not necessarily even or uneven, we don't need to get with measurements of these things, then we see like that the zone of fabulousness and collective care and solidarity teams are practices of mutuality. And that's what solidarity is.
And that's so important in this work. And I have people that worry about my safety on the streets.
Yeah.
And I tell them, no, I have hundreds of bodyguards. Every one of my patients would be out there to protect me.
I just want to say this.
Yeah.
Like, if I was in the suburbs waiting for a bus, I would be way more afraid. 100%. I'm afraid of guys in trucks or businessmen on their way home from what, like, it's interesting, isn't it? And that's about these relationships of mutuality and respect and dignity. That's how you structure safety, is through relationship, not boundaries and rules.
And the relationship
and also I just want to quote someone
Go
once
ahead.
told me, a guy who was responding to overdose deaths, and he said to a team, the best thing you can do for your safety is to be kind. And what I would say is be in relationship.
That's beautiful. I love that. The best thing you can do for your safety is be kind and be in relationship, which is making me, your comments are making me think about my own path as a nurse practitioner, that I once worked in a suburban practice where we talk about the worried well. The people with the sniffles for 3 days that are demanding antibiotics, and a sense of entitlement around that there's privilege and entitlement. And I have come to think of the people I work with now as the unworried unwell. They've got, an arm that's going to fall off from an abscess and cellulitis, and they're not seeking care for it. So I show up and do what I can do. But that lack of entitlement and the lack of privilege, and the fact that my people have been stigmatized and made almost invisible by society, there's this depth of gratitude that when we show care and kindness and compassion, people just, it's like adding water to a droopy flower. They just perk up and, wow, somebody cares. And that, I think, is the healing balm that we bring in street medicine, is to just care and to learn people's names and to validate who they are in their personhood.
Yeah, I think we want to always side with the ethical principle of autonomy versus paternalism. So autonomy is where you respect people, respect and dignity, relationships of respect and dignity, where we actually trust people with their lives. And we resist that professional training that tells us that we have to tell people how to live. That's paternalism. And it doesn't matter what your gender is. This comes from Black feminist bell hooks. If what you are doing is domination and control, it's patriarchy. It's paternalism, right? And so, what you're explaining is like being in relationships with folks, giving them, that's what harm reduction's about, respect and dignity. Give people options, they decide, and we're in a relationship with them, but we're not telling them how to live. And this idea that there's, I don't know about like gratitude necessarily. There doesn't have to be gratitude, does there? But like,
No.
it's that we're in real relationships. There's people, other people would expect to respond with gratitude, who are pissed off because you're late, or or what, because we're in real relationships with real humans, you know? And so I think, I think for me, I'm always driven by that question, what is the best use of me? And that's where I get fed. My soul gets, I was like, today I was useful. That was a good use of me. I think about it that in those ways, right?
That's the title of your book, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Tell us about that. Tell us
Oh,
about your book.
I have a book that came out. It's just being launched right now from the UK. And Gail Simon is a professor in the UK who decided with Leah Slater to put a bunch of my 20 articles together in a book. And we called it To Be of Use, because that's a question I ask all the time. It came from a poem by Marge Piercy, To Be of Use. And that's when I think about my work, I haven't really had a career, but it doesn't make any sense in terms of moving up or capitalism or getting more power and more money. But it makes perfect sense, Michael, if you think that I've always been thinking of this question, what's the best use of me? So I was a university professor, but then I stepped out and was responding to the opiate catastrophe, these kind of things. So, but that all the author money for that book goes back to the publisher, because they do a great job of trying to get voices that are silenced published. So,
Yeah. Your To Be of Use makes me think of something that is a guiding principle for me of I recognizing that I have privilege. White, cisgender male, education, etc. What is the best use of my privilege, and how am I using my privilege? And is it to love and serve? And if not, then why not? So I just would add that in. And when you were talking about autonomy and agency of our patients, I had a powerful lesson in that there was a patient, Paul, who was sleeping on the steps of the church on the concrete, right? And he keeps saying he wants to get housed. He wants housing. He wants to be in a bed. So we go to Department of Social Services and wait 3 hours to be seen, and they offer him a bed, but it's in a small shelter, and he says no. And I was having such trouble with it, from my vantage point. Like, wait, it's you're going back to the concrete steps. This is, you just share a room with one other person. Do this. And I got some energy around trying to convince him, and he told me off. He used some very colorful language and told me to butt out. And I learned so much from Paul about respecting always agency and autonomy. And in street medicine, we don't talk about patient-centered care. We talk about patient-led care. I know that my patients aren't, they're not going to do what I tell them if it's coming from a paternalistic perspective. So patient-led care where they have autonomy and agency is critically important.
thanks for that. I mean, when I think about that story, like I think, and I respect your, humility. We need to have humility if we're going to respond with ethics and do justice with people. But I think one of the things we need to continually remind ourselves is we do not know what we're talking about. Like, we don't know we do not know the context of other humans' lives. So I can think of 1,000 stories that I hold where workers have thought, this person's made a bad decision. I don't know about your man here. But it might be that somebody sexually assaulted him in that building, that he knows other people who owe somebody money who might find somebody there. Like, there's a whole bunch of things we don't know, and people ought not to have to tell us. And that's when you talk about being led by participants. It's not just like a nice, friendly thing to do. It's understanding with all humility, we are unqualified to make decisions for other people's lives. And here's what I believe. If you are able to actually create relationships of respect and dignity with participants and build a bridge to them instead of them trying to build a bridge to us, if we create that relationship and meet them where they're at in the world, then I think two things happen. The first one is you realize people's behavior makes sense, and you understand people are trying to be safe. Now, that person might not have chose to tell you why their behavior makes sense, but it totally makes sense that they turned down that housing. And what they're trying to do is not die or sleep on the street. They're trying to be safe, and they know more about their safety than we can. And it's not okay to try to have people reveal that to us. We People ought not to tell us everything they can't for all kinds of really great reasons about safety. So I think when we get the humility to understand our job is to create that relationship of respect and dignity, not to tell people how to live.
So true. So true. And that the trauma responses that people have, I think that's one of the challenges I have in doing this work is, we talk about trauma, trauma aware, trauma informed care, trauma responsive care. But we don't know. And that the trauma people have experienced just manifests in so many myriad of ways. And I recognize it when it pops up, but I didn't see it coming. If that makes sense, like it's theirs, not mine. And can you say a word about working with the traumatized, what you have found to be of benefit?
Yeah. Well, I don't really like
Everybody's
the word
traumatized. It's people. Yeah.
I don't like the word trauma because it's
Oh,
a medical term that depoliticizes things and locates it in the person's brain as if they have a broken brain and now they're going to have these responses that make no sense to people. And so we have to do, what I think about is people are oppressed and people
mm,
always resist their oppression. It may not make sense to you, but like I said, if you can understand that person's world, their response actually makes sense. And I also believe people are more complicated than that. People choose responses. We're not triggered. There's actually no wires in the brain. I'm not saying there aren't neural pathways. So how I think about it is, I think about people are oppressed and suffering, not necessarily traumatized, because I don't think the problem's in the brain. And if you think the problem is in the brain, the solution is getting the right medicine to fix the brain. If you think the problem's in the social world, the answer is to get the person to work collectively for more justice for all of us. I hope that's not like I have a lot of thoughts about how trauma has been weaponized. I'll just give you one example. A woman, somebody called the police on a woman who was a neighbor in a building. They thought she had a weapon. SWAT team shows up. 6 police officers drag her away. She doesn't have a weapon. They oppressed her. Like I think she was half naked when they pulled. It was awful. The whole thing was awful. We made a complaint about it. Then I had to do work with the whole everybody living in the building, and then with the workers, and then the woman, and so I complained about that. And the reality is, all of those police officers, Michael, have trauma-informed practice certificates. So it's any tool's a weapon if you hold it right, but it's also like
yeah.
this. If we use a language of trauma, then you can have trauma from a car accident or being like strip searched by a police officer. Like they're equal events. They're not, because one involves power and oppression, right? So I have I have a lot of thoughts about that.
Well, thank you for sharing some of them. Vikki, you have helped me in my perspective on working with the unhoused in a powerful way of not pathologizing the individuals and bringing it out to the larger societal political context. Could you talk about that and vis-a-vis we think of people as homeless and mentally ill and addicted
Yeah.
and just
Yeah.
give us your larger macro environment perspective on
Well,
that.
it's really convenient to think about people as mentally ill, addicted, or traumatized because all of those things are located inside their brain, inside their bodies, and their skin-bound entity. So they've made bad life choices, and this is the response. So when they die of overdose or poisoning or all these other kind of horrible deaths, then we can say, well, they died of addiction or they died of trauma. They died of they didn't. They died of structural and targeted abandonment. They died of necropolitics, policies of death, where we actually, like in this country, we're closing overdose prevention sites and people are dying. So I just think this psychological language, I'm not all against all of it. I'm just saying if we describe, why is that person homeless? Is it addiction, mental illness, or trauma? It's like, no, they're homeless because I don't know what's going on in Rochester, but in Canada, we stopped building social housing almost 30 years ago, and we've built a homeless nation. People being homeless isn't about addiction, mental illness, or trauma, right? It's about a lack of social housing. And we know the research shows that 6 months after being unhoused, you will be addicted, mentally ill, and traumatized. So I'm real, again, that's one of my concerns, like, again, about like the language of trauma, addiction, mental illness. It's ways to blame people for their own suffering that's actually structural. And if they die, to blame them for their own deaths. And it's just a real smoothing over practice. That's what I think.
With all kinds of moral judgment
Yeah.
inherent in it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Vikki, we're coming down to our last few minutes. Is there something else you wanted to share? What's the question you wish I had asked?
Oh, no, this has been really wonderful. Big respect for your team and everything folks are doing. I think these kind of dialogues, Michael, you inviting me to our other beloved Michael Boucher's connection and stuff like that. This is the stuff that amplifies my hope. This conversation has been mutual aid for me. It's important for me to know that you're in Rochester on the street treating people with dignity. It helps me be of use. That's part of solidarity and collective care, you know?
Thank you, Vikki. And likewise, back at you with that. We ask every guest to answer something. It could be considered a silly question, but maybe it's profound. If you could do one thing to make the world a better place, what would it be?
Organize.
Right. All right. Organize and agitate. Okay. And how can people connect with you?
Oh, I have a website, VikkiReynolds.ca. If you just Google Vikki Reynolds, I spell it Vikki. There's a bunch of online workshops people could go to, but I have a lot of free articles and videos. Everybody's free to use all my stuff.
I'm really going to promote that people go to your webpage because I love your landing page. Let's repeat that again. What's the website?
Oh, VikkiReynolds.ca.
.ca. Okay. Very good. Vikki, thank you so much for connecting with us today. It's been a pleasure and a joy to have you on the program. And I think there's going to be comments and questions and follow-up from this that I might fire your way. There will be a transcript with the podcast. It's going to go up on Spotify and Apple. And thank you so much. Really appreciate you talking to us today.
Thanks so much.
All right. Be well.
The opinions expressed in this podcast are those of the individuals included and are not representative of the opinions of the Street Medicine Institute or the Street Medicine Institute Student Coalition. Do not use this podcast as medical advice and instead see your own provider for medical care.